All right, our next presentation is from Alan from our club. And I want to say that Alan is the guy who actually made it all happen for us and dragged this club president down that road. So it's kind of nice for me to have him talk tonight. So Alan, I'm going to spotlight you and you can share. Well, I guess I already beaten to that punch. Okay.
Well,
Go for it.
and I would say that, John, you were categorizing people into kind of two categories of not knowing and being a technical expert, and you actually have the other one, which is that they're technically curious. They're willing to learn, they want to know, and then there are those that say, I don't want to know, I don't want to be part of this, or I'm forced into this, but I don't like it. And Bruce was definitely in this category of, I'm willing to learn this and I'm willing to step up to the point where if we have a disaster and I'm not available, Bruce runs it and he's able to go and do things. And I'll start off with showing our kind of our environment and sort of the processes and techniques that we've tended towards, and I'll give you just a quick view of some of the configuration changes that we've gone through. I have a background in audiovisual, and I've done some sound work. This is not our setup.
I hope not.
This is an event that I did with my company, where I was employing a professional AV group that we were at the the Washington Convention Center, and so thinking in terms of the way cables are laid out and the way things are thrown together, or that may or may not think that things are professional. This is a common thing to have cables scattered, to have things laid out as in terms of what's going on. You'll see that in our slides. We've gotten the configuration working first, and then we're working on optimizing it and cleaning it up. And every single time we do it, it gets set up faster, and we have more neatness and other types of things. Our club started out where we were live in-house. We had a projection screen and a single camera, and we used that for giving views on a fairly dim front-end screen. We upgraded to TVs, and we had an additional camera that was a very cheap, it's a very, very inexpensive action camera. And we then started towards the path of figuring out additional camera views when COVID hit, and we went completely remote. So we stayed remote until towards the March timeframe of this year, and we did a demonstration. We made the plans for having a demonstration with an individual who would come in, but the audience would continue to stay remote. So in some ways, we were doing an IRD with our facility, but getting everything mapped out and tested. So our configuration is a fairly standard setup. We use 3 screens that are projecting the exact same thing. We have 2 Zoom screens, and we have a presenter monitor that is being turned around and being shown to the demonstrator at the lathe. And all 3 of those are the same signal. They are all showing the Zoom view, which gives a view of the audience and a reflection of the participant or the demonstrator.
Alan, that GoPro camera, I didn't realize GoPros would put out HDMI.
So I'll get to that. That's a really good question. So there are some configurations, and I actually spent time talking with Trent Bosch about that, and figured out what the configuration that he was using in order to do that. So we have effectively 3 live cameras that are all putting out HDMI, and then we have a 4th connection, which is often going to be a desktop computer. So this was the design configuration that we played around with a group before we decided to go out to buy everything. We were upgrading a lot of the equipment that we had. Many of the equipment pieces that we bought just before COVID were effectively technically obsolete by the 2 years later that we were moving towards the hybrid environment. So We did decide to go with the ATEM Mini Pro. We went towards the possibilities that it gave us the most number of options in the future. We can still do webcam and HDMI or USB switching if we want to, and we actually have a little bit of a variation that we use on that. So this was the design that we did that was conceptual, that I used this for the board meeting to show everybody what was going on. And that evolved into our wiring diagram that actually is what we use to have our things connected when we assemble things on the demonstration days. This is a very dense page. It's not really made to be viewed this way. It's made to be printed on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. When we get to the point where it's stabilized, we will probably even laminate it and stick it to some of the pieces so that people who are not familiar with the setup can see the wiring, see the labels that are on the cables. We do label everything that we can. And we walk through and can assemble everything on the day of the demonstration. I should say that. So in our venue, in the past, we have taken 2.5 hours to set up. We are down to, Bruce, what are we, about 35 minutes?
No, I would say it takes us a little more than an hour to get it set up now.
Okay. And the general configuration is that we have storage areas that several hundred feet away through a couple of hallways and doorways that we have to move things. So we're unpacking a very dense storage area that is very much a furniture puzzle. And we're pulling out things and then having to assemble them. Our boom camera, that's actually of Rick Baker's design, is one of the more difficult things to store because of the size of it. It fits into our storage cubicle area diagonally, but we disconnect it from the base that's there. So on our first day, we did our demonstration where Mark Supik, who is a professional turner from Baltimore City and is a long and loyal club member, he did a demonstration, and it was actually his first remote demo. He had not done a web demo environment and was not really keen on going without the audience. That was where it was really essential. Having that presenter monitor in front of him gave him a chance to see what the audience was reacting to and how they were, when they asked a question, you could hear the audio from them during his turning. So there are certainly hazards in having your cameras out in the space. We had our boom camera decorated with all sorts of green wood turnings that were streamed all over the place. When we then moved to hybrid meetings, there were a couple of things that we determined that were going to be essential. One is we were going to have a remote moderator. That's me. I'm immune compromised. And so I go in with a mask. I work with the team on setting things up, and I help here with any technical issues, and we work through the problems. And then I leave and I go home. And then I moderate for the remote side while Bruce is actually doing all the camera switching and the audio work and everything else. And he's done a spectacular job for somebody who purported to be a brand new beginner on that.
No, wait a minute. In that setup, you can each work the host controls, right?
We do not. We can work the Zoom host controls. That's correct.
But you can't work the PC controls remotely.
That's right. There are some options and possibilities that I could do in which we might, have remote control of the keyboards and such like that. But I think if we got to the point where either there was an issue where Bruce was incapacitated or we did not have remote connection, then we're going to kind of back away from the possibility of having the hybrid being a rich experience for both remote and online people, or remote and local people. So our typical setup is that we have effectively 3 cameras that can give us a variety of views. In this view, we've got the boom camera that can give us both the overhead and the 3/4 view, or even end-on view that those top 2 are being shown. The top right camera is actually our GoPro, and it is on a flexible stalk on a stand that's weighted so that we can move it around and we can adjust it to different locations. This past week, we actually changed the frame rate on it, so it's now running as a 2K 60K, sorry, 2K 60 frame rate camera view. We've gotten much better quality image out of that. The bottom right is a tripod that is in the audience. And in the case of when we're turning a bowl, we tend to put up a plexiglass panel because the audience is fairly close to the demonstrator. So this is a modification for Rick Baker's camera boom. We have made some changes in order to make it a little bit more lightweight. We just recently changed out the hinge mechanism so that it's actually using some gliding hinges, or you know, they're a smooth bearing oil bearing system that's made for cameras, and it gives us a much cleaner ability to be able to slide the camera around and to be able to raise and lower as necessary. We're also making some adjustments where we're going to be changing. The remote is normally down on the tripod itself. We've modified that so that we're putting the remote up onto the back pipe so that the individual can stand a little bit further away and can really boom that, put the boom in close to the demonstrator.
Cool.
And we actually are using a heavy duty surveyor's tripod for the base. And we've upgraded the casters on that to be a larger diameter so they can roll over top of chips. And as you can see, some of our demonstrators can get quite lively. Mark Supik is famous for being able to aim his streamers, and he was working pretty hard at getting a spectacular coverage, and this was quite effective. So. Nice. So our environment is that we're in a small rectangular room in the basement of a Shriner's temple that they rent us space. So it is a tiled floor, it's a square room, and our demonstrators are pretty close to our audience members. So one of the things that we found early on, and it was actually think through this forum that Bruce now engages, and I've simulated here that we actually have a telephone, a cell phone that's running Zoom as an additional participant, and it is then showing the audience. So people, if they want to, they can pin the audience as well as the demonstrator and be able to see what's going on to the crowd as well as to the main demonstration view that we're sending to everybody.
Bruce got that from our club, and we think that's critical. Right. That's what enables the social communication, is to have that view of the room and the view of the Zoom.
Yep, and very early on, when I was watching your YouTube channels views and different demonstration configurations that you were going for, that was something that I thought was very engaging for connecting the remote hybrid audience with the online or the local crowd.
There's a 3-minute video about that as part of the hybrid series, the tutorial series on different Zooms, all of the different ways you can look through the cameras and connect people.
That's right.
Culminating in multiple spotlights, which is, to me, the best way to go.
So we went from a configuration where we had this inexpensive GoPro camera that could output HDMI. Its frame rate was not very good. It did have some issues with color registration where we had some things that just weren't quite there, but it was good for us to perfect our craft. I don't know, it was like a $40 camera or something. And if we get to the point of where we're going to have an additional camera where we want something in a risky environment, we'll throw that camera in there, because if it gets whacked, then we can replace it for almost nothing. The main GoPro camera that we have is a different configuration. So we have a flexible mount. We have a mag switch so that we can change it and mount it to different places, but we have it on a small music stand that's weighted at the bottom. It gives us the ability to be able to put it in a couple of different configurations. This was our 2nd generation camera. And then finally,
before you move on, you should that was our show and tell kind of environment here, where you bring your piece up and stick it on the X, and that camera captures it very nicely. But go ahead.
Yep. And we were in good shape until somebody moved the X.
Yeah, well, that's
So the next configuration that we did was that we got a GoPro Hero 8, and there is what's called a media adapter, and that allows you to connect the GoPro Hero that has a collar that goes around it, and it provides the output of an HDMI signal and having your power connector coming out the back of the camera. This allows you to be able to shove the camera and point it directly at whatever it is you're going to be viewing. And this was the configuration that Trent Bosch used, and he got that from Alan Zenreich's early configurations, where Alan had helped Trent figure out a number of different things. So this configuration is worthwhile and it's useful. However, this media adapter is not always of the best quality from out of the gate. It very often can suffer infant death. It'll die within the first 20 minutes of use, and you have to send it back, and then they send you a replacement. And then if it works past that first 20 minutes, you're good. It's going to work for years. So we did have that issue, and we did have to send it back under warranty, and we got a replacement right away.
So do you find the GoPro a better camera for you than, for example, a Brio?
It is, because for us, the ability to be able to take that higher frame rate, and more importantly was we're looking at the clarity of the image under the same kind of lighting that the rest of the cameras are doing. And in our case, because it's enclosed in this case and it's a GoPro, we're also a little bit less worried about needing to put it behind a plexiglass panel or something else that's going to smack it, including chisels. So for us, looking at the concept of having an action camera that can get in potentially very close, and to have that focus range that we could potentially get into where we're looking at, within inches of the piece that's being worked on.
Is that focus range on the camera controls, or is it on your screen?
No, it's just because the camera's lens system is capable of doing that. So we don't typically run any of the camera controls during the demonstration. We do fire and forget.
Good.
So we set up the camera and we leave it simple.
Yeah, I agree.
We wrap in about 5 minutes or less, Alan.
Yeah, well, I'm going to field questions. So
yes.
Here's one of our tips. GoPros don't like long HDMI cables. There is a difficulty of being able to get the voltage to push it that distance. Here's our trick. Use an HDMI splitter, a 1 to 2 splitter, and don't connect a second monitor to it, but connect the other end to your ATEM Mini.
That's a plug-in splitter. That's got to be a plug-in splitter to do that.
A plug-in splitter, that's correct. Not a passive.
That amplifies the signal.
And that's right. It'll act as a signal booster. It'll also synchronize the signal. It also gives you the capability of being able to send it a much longer distance. And potentially, if you're using a fiber-based HDMI cable, it'll give power to both ends of it so that it can get that signal across the room over to your ATEM. We found a fairly significant improvement on reliability by having it plugged into the splitter. And, we could buy an HDMI booster, but for our situation, having this splitter available for us gives us some flexibility for other configurations if we decide to ever do that. Next, we've got a presenter monitor. And in the past, we tried out putting it on rollers. It just wasn't worth it. So I've replaced that with a stable stand. And that stand, which was originally a room fan, has the capability of going from being about 2 feet high up to about 4.5 feet high. So it'll give the presenter a number of different views that they can work with to see themselves. And sometimes it's called a vanity monitor that gives them the ability to see which camera is being used, or what perspective, or if they're holding something and whether they're in camera or out, or when they're wanting to address the online crowd as to which camera to look into. So this is our control station. This is where Bruce sits. His Mac is on the right. We have that plugged in as one of the camera sources, and we use that primarily for being able to show slides or videos, or if we're doing a remote demonstration, they may come in through that system possibly. But the other 3 cameras are defined so that we have our front of house camera going into 1, our boom camera is into 2, and GoPro is into 3. And that gives us that normal sequence. There's also something special with the ATEM Mini, which is that if you have if you're wanting to do picture in a picture, it will by nature and by default will pick camera 1 for the picture in a picture using the buttons. We have not gotten into doing macros where people have done things like made the picture in a picture bigger, or to be able to do split screens with 50-50 splits. We know that's possible. We're not there yet. That's our next level of evolution.
Steve Crescenzo later in this meeting is going to give us a real good workout on the ATEM. That's
fantastic.
That's the
I'll be
focus of
taking
his
notes.
presentation. Yeah,
So,
I will too.
So our main configuration, and I'll show it here, is that we have a Dell outlet desktop that has 2 display ports and 1 HDMI output. We take the display port output and we convert that into HDMI and send that to the front of the room. So that PC thinks it has 2 monitors, one above the other. The one that's lower is the one that's on this table that normally is used for seeing the Zoom controls, the ATEM controls, or any other kinds of chat windows that Bruce might use. And then he puts the Zoom window up on the big display, and that gets shown on 3 big monitors. The monitor to the right, or in the middle of this case, in between the laptop and the second monitor, that's showing the output from the ATEM, and that ATEM view is giving us what's called multi-view, in which we can see all of the cameras and the microphone outputs and any other kind of graphic signals or things that we're putting there.
And that's the software that comes with the ATEM from Blackmagic Designs.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So very, very important. We do this. We label things. We have the cables. The cables are labeled on both ends. The ports in which they're getting plugged into are labeled, and the switches that are getting triggered are labeled. We have found that by doing that, it allows us to have more volunteers. More people are willing to help with that without having to have the tribal knowledge or the verbal heritage to understand how to get things plugged in. And it means that I can be concentrating on enhancing something or fixing something while other people are doing the generic regular setup about what's happening.
Very good.
So
very good.
I cannot emphasize enough that a label maker will save you hours in setup and teardown.
You're absolutely right about that.
Certainly from lessons learned, the thing that we recognized and realized in our club space, we only have really 2 circuits that are available to us. One of them we want to plug the lathe in, and the other one we plug in all of the AV equipment. You don't tend to want to plug into 2 separate circuits for your AV materials, because if there's any kind of difference in the voltage or a difference in the circuits between those, the path in which those 2 are going to equalize each other is through your AV equipment, and that can cause a hum, or it can cause a destruction of your electronics
or rolling screen as well.
That's true. Yeah. So we will take we have a number of different plugs that we will pull 1 extension cord from the wall, and we'll get it in as much as we can in terms of running things from that one location. And we are currently running with both of our TVs, all the monitors, the equipment, and the PC. We're still well under what that circuit's going to be able to support. So last and most important for us is that we bring in our own Wi-Fi setup, so that we do have a hardwired connection into the building's Ethernet, and they have broadband, so we're able to use that setup. We then we do have local Wi-Fi for the building, and we let any of the regular club members use that, but we have our own private Wi-Fi if we ever need to have devices that are part of the internal network. But the key piece to this is that the PC, the ATEM Mini, and any other kind of devices or cameras are all plugged into this router, so that they are running as a local network. That means that the PC can talk to the ATEM, not just through the USB cable, but also through the internet, and be able to do connections and drive any of the data that way. Lastly, for us, lessons learned that we got was that we need to document the wiring and what the placement is going to be, how things are located. We're getting better about taking pictures, and we're trying to get better about how the labeling and how the configurations are set up. We're trying to make it so that there's less necessary thinking and trying to derive something as to where it's supposed to be, as opposed to knowing or doing it from practice. Label your cables and connections. Here's the other thing: using a local host and a remote co-host. Cannot emphasize it enough. In the case of power outages, there's also the situation of where the people online may not want to stick around to wait for the reconnection. That remote host can actually start up a conversation, and it can be other things that are ready. We also have the possibility of being able to invoke a club video that we could show and have a conversation with while we're waiting for the main building to come back online. The other one for us, the GoPro camera, if you've got a long HDMI cable, use a splitter or a booster. That will eliminate a lot of issues with dealing with these action cameras that have difficult HDMI communications that's there. Also, this group has taught us about using original sound. We've had a very strange setup of where somebody's doing turning, and when they start turning, everything goes silent. And it's because Zoom is saying, wow, there's a whole lot of background noise. I'm going to do noise suppression and I'm going to knock it down. And it's eerie, because then when somebody starts talking, it's like they're talking to an empty room, and it disconnects you from that experience of the show. And then lastly, plan for your power. We do not have enough power plugs, or if we don't have enough extension cords or breakout boxes, power is not going to be in the right places. As you can see from our original diagram, we have a lot of power plugs that we're using.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it from the Batcave. And
questions, comments, questions for
lots
Alan.
of questions. Dennis.
A simple question. The output we're looking at, the wiring diagram, what software did you create that diagram in?
Oh, I did this in PowerPoint.
Okay.
So you can also do it in Visio, and there's a number of other pieces, but believe it or not, I did the entire thing in PowerPoint. And then I Googled online for images of the various kinds of connectors. So these, if I don't know if I can actually zoom in on I can zoom in on the images, that these cables are actually faithful to the kind of port that's there. So you can actually see that something is a power plug versus an HDMI cable versus a USB cable. And I did that just purely by
really good.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to send out this image that's got all these different cut and paste pieces that you could use to maneuver around. I'll send this. Actually, Bruce has a copy of this. He can get it to John. You guys can. You're more than welcome to use that that screenshot.
We will
Steve.
do that.
Can you kill that share, Alan?
Sure can.
I'll kill the share. You guys go on and talk. Steve, go for it. I'll kill the share here.
Alan, are you trying to amplify the audio for the on-site audience?
We tend not to use a lot of amplification because our room doesn't need it. We do have the capability of doing that, in that the TV speakers could do some boosting if we wanted to, but we really tend to just use the speakers in the room for being able to amplify either slideshows or videos that might be coming in, or the remote attendees.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Eric Brown?
Yeah, you were talking about long HDMI cables, and I was wondering, what do you consider a long cable before you had to boost it? I think our longest one is like 25 feet. And,
we have a couple of 30 footers. They are fiber based, so they're ones that we got from Monoprice, and they are specifically designed to be powered on both ends, and they have a fiber optic signal cable that's going in between. It's a great reason for that as well, in that cables that are that long also would not get any magnetic interference that might disrupt it. And if we're running it past the lathe motors, or other kinds of signals that might have RF interference, these fiber-based HDMI cables can really run quite the distance. The key is they have to be powered by a device that understands how to put the put the voltage into the signal so that that fiber cable is powered on both ends, because it's basically a sender and a transmitter and a light beam that goes in between.
You could
But
maybe
Sure,
give
ours
us,
is not
we
fiber.
have 30-foot HDMI cables.
so maybe you could give us the spec on that and we'll put it out as part of the follow-up.
Sure can.
Okay.
Rick, you have a question?
Alan, I'd like you to send me your pictures of your modifications to the boom. I mean, I did this thing all by myself, and willing to look at anything you guys come up with. I really
can.
appreciate seeing it.
Yeah,
Also,
we did some
I have,
dumpster diving and scrounging for some of the parts that.
well, how do you think I did it? One of the things is for pushing HDMI cables. I ran into this Rockfish splitter, double splitter. It's from Best Buy, and it pushes far. I'm looking at a monitor over here that has 75 feet of cable on it, and I've actually pushed it over 100 very dependably. So it's something to look into. I mean, this is the box for it. I was trying to take the label off of it, but it's.
Yeah, and Rockfish is one of Best Buy's generic brands that they're one of Best Buy's suppliers, and they have a whole bunch of different things that they do, that everything from generic power supplies and other sorts of replacements that are there.
Michael Linsky?
Hi, thanks. Could you talk me through how you do your audio into the ATEM?
Oh, actually, Bruce could probably answer that question better than I can, which is very funny because I spent 18 years as a sound man.
So there are
Bruce has got a different configuration.
There are two inputs to the ATEM Pro Mini. We use one of them where we daisy chain some of these hockey puck things that we were talking about in the very beginning. I always forget the name of it. John, you know,
CM1000 puck mics, they're court reporter microphones.
So we daisy chain those, and then into the other input, it was actually in one of the pictures Alan had. We're using the Rode Go 2 wireless 2-channel system now, where we can actually wire up the demonstrator and one other person if we want to, or use that for a pass-around microphone, which I've had in my mind, but we haven't tried yet. So we use the combination. And the nice thing about the Rode 2 is you can individually control the gains on those two input mics, so you don't have to rely on the fact you're only using one input on the ATEM. So that's what we're doing now. As Alan said, our room is not that large, so dealing with the room itself is not that big a deal. But when we went to the Rode 2, actually in the last video, it was amazing how much better the demonstrator sounds over our prior system that we had had.
Yeah, we use the Rode 2 as well. Where we have some problems is getting the Zoom participant's voice into the room. What do you do for that?
That we're just using the TV.
Just using the TV?
And we have not had any feedback issues with that. We were always concerned about that. We do have two TVs at both ends of the room, and we usually only put the sound out of one of them, trying to keep that sound as far away from the other microphones as we can.
Okay.
We do that as well. You also mentioned a pass-around microphone, Bruce. We have consistently found the microphone gets there just as the guy finishes talking.
Yeah, that's probably true. And we find in our small room, the two hockey puck mics pretty much pick up the room quite well. We're pretty surprised, actually, that you do it that well.
We use 4 of them. We have one of them right up on the lathe so the demonstrator can talk into it as well. And we hardly use any of the other mics anymore.
Yeah, Rode actually has a handheld mic that you can put the wireless piece right into it and act it like a handheld mic. But yeah, we have not actually used that.
We just taped it to a scraper.
Yeah, of course.
You got to move on, I think.
Yes, I do so think. Alan, thank you so much. It was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you, and I'm glad to.
If you guys have other questions for Alan, just put them in the chat and we'll see if we can't get them answered.